Hi, my name is Sheila, and this is my channel, Seaside Snuggles Quilts, Patterns, and Crafts, where I focus mainly on quilts, but will craft anything that tickles my fancy. Today, we're going to work on the second part of the Hugs and Kisses quilt, which is going to be the heart sections. And if you are interested in the first part of this quilt, you'll find that in the video previous to that, and I will link that down below. It will work on the O section of the quilt. This particular quilt finishes 48 inches by 71.5 inches. It's the perfect lap size. You can work it up fairly quickly. You could probably get this done by Valentine's Day, and if not, you can definitely get it done by Mother's Day. The pattern is not in the store yet, but when I do have it in the store, I will link it in the description below, and it will have additional sizes so that you can make bigger or smaller quilts. So, without further ado, let's get started on the heart sections of this Hugs and Kisses quilt. Okay, welcome back. So now we're going to talk about the second part of our quilt along, where we're going to be making the heart blocks of our Hugs and Kisses quilt. And what you're going to need, I'm actually going to put 2 sets of numbers up on the board, but what you're going to need are some large squares that measure 9¼ inch square. You're going to need some small squares that measure 4 7/8. You're going to need some rectangles that measure 8.5 by 2.5. You're also going to need some squares in your pink or red color that measure 5¼ and you're going to need 2 sets of squares that measure 3 inches square on each. So I'll put up on the board the number of each that you're going to need to finish the throw quilt. Also, I'm going to put a second set of numbers up that will allow you to make larger flying geese, because we're going to make a flying geese for the bottom and 2 flying geese for the top of each block, and then we'll sew a rectangle in the middle. I found that as I sewed these together, my seam allowances weren't perfectly consistent, and so all of my blocks are a little, they have a little bit of wonkiness to them. The second set of numbers that I'm going to put up are if you would like to get more perfect blocks, more consistent blocks, by making a larger block and then cutting it down to size. So on the left side is the accurate numbers that you're going to need to make these blocks. On the right side are expanded numbers to make larger blocks that you can cut down to the proper size and get more perfect blocks. Your heart blocks are going to square up to 8.5 by 8.5 inches when finished, and they'll be 8 inches square in your block. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I have already marked these are my X colors, or my kiss colors of fabric, with a 45-degree line on each of these to make our flying geese. And I've also marked my background fabrics and my X fabrics for my smaller flying geese with a line down the 45-degree angle. I'm going to start with these, and with the larger ones that are going to be the bottom parts of your heart blocks, you're going to get 4 per set of flying geese. So you're going to get 4, which will be good to make 4 hearts. I'm not going to make all 4 right now. I'm going to just work on the dark one so that you can see how it goes together, but I will show you how you end up with 4 of each. So I'm going to set all the pieces of the polka dot ones aside, and we're just going to work on these darker pink ones. And you're going to set your smaller squares on top of your large square like this. I like to put the bottom square, which is the one closest to me, underneath the top square so that I don't have to worry about flipping the fabric over when I cross this point. So we're going to put this together. I'm just going to take this and set it over at the machine. I'm also going to take, and I'm going to do 1 set of the small flying geese, you will get enough for 2 hearts out of one of these sets, okay? So you're gonna set this up the same way. The only difference is I have oversized, even in the accurate measurements, I have oversized the small squares so that you can be guaranteed to get at least 1/4 of an inch off the top of your flying geese. So we're going to start these by putting our X color on top of the larger block, and again I want my top block to be on top of my bottom block. So these are ready to sew. I'm going to take these to the sewing machine. All right, so both the large and the small are going to be sewn the same way. I'm going to go ahead and start with the small one. And I'm just going to sew 1/4 of an inch away from the lines. I'm just going to rotate this 180 degrees and sew back the other way. So this large one's going to go together the same way. Around. All right, so let's go to the mat and cut these apart. We want to cut these between the 2 stitch lines. Line frame, I am. Same thing here. Let's see if I can get this all on. So I switched to my green mat so you can see it instead of having the pink mat on there. But I already missed the pink mat. All right, so for both of these, we're going to press towards the pink, which isn't what you normally do, but in this case, I want the hearts to sit up a little bit from the rest of the fabric. Just get this spritzed and then I'll finish cutting that apart. And it's just water in my spray bottle here. And yes, I'm going to press these toward the pink. I'll fast forward through the pressing and then we'll move to the next step. That's not 100% necessary. It's really up to you. It's just my personal preference to press towards the hearts. Let's flip this over. There we go. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the next 2 pieces on, and we're just going to line up the square with the point on the pink. So that's ready to sew. And this is ready to sew. I'll put this by the machine as well. On this one, we're going to switch to the background fabrics. So we're going to put one like this. My line is aligned up with the corner. And we're going to put this one on here. And now all of these are ready to sew. So let me at the machine. I'm going to start with these heart bottoms. And we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to sew 1/4 of an inch away from the line. Rotate. Next. large hearts usually work out, so you don't need to use the larger numbers for this just because you use the larger numbers for the smaller flying geese, but if you want to, they'll be available there. All right, and here's our flying geese. Pieces off here. We'll finish this up. All right, so we're going to take all of these and we're going to cut them between the stitch lines. So for our for our flying geese, you're going to have a left side and a right side, and these are going to be mirrored. And what I like to do is have one side towards, for these only, one side toward the pink and one side away from the pink. So the left side I'm going to press away from the pink, like this. And you'll notice with these extra large squares that you get a lot of space here, so you can float your point and not have it cut off. At minimum, you'll know that you have enough there to get your 1/4 inch line. So these I'm going to press the seam allowance towards the pink. And they take a little extra doing because this seam allowance right here makes it a little thick. All right, so those are my small flying geese. And for the large flying geese, I'm going to press them towards the pink. This does a couple of things. One, it sets my heart up above the fabric. So if I was going to stitch in the ditch, it would be on the background fabric. Also, it gives me less bulk right here at the bottom of the heart by pressing your seam allowances towards the, I guess this is the goose part of a flying goose. You take some of the bulk out of the seam allowance for when you piece them together. So I like to press it towards the pink or red or whatever color you decided to use for your hearts. I think it might be cool to do one with black hearts, right? If you're feeling like that. All of these. So you get 4 bottoms with your large flying geese, and you get what's going to be 2 tops with these small flying geese. So however many hearts you want to make for your own quilt, you'll need twice as many of the small flying geese as you do of the large flying geese. All right, so these bottoms are going to square to 4.5 by 8.5. So I'm using my 9-inch ruler. And I'm just going to square up 2 of these. Now these are the more precise numbers, but if you use the larger numbers, you'll have a lot more to work with when squaring these up. About a 1/4 inch-ish. And you'll see that tomorrow because I think I'm going to cut the last part of the blocks that we're going to put together, which are going to be for the X's. I think I'm going to cut those larger so I have that, fudge factor. When you're doing your flying geese blocks, make sure that you're keeping at least a 1/4 inch off the tip of your blocks so that you don't lose that in your final quilt. So it's 4.5 by 8.5 is what we're after on these pieces. And I'm just going to square up these 2. I have these 2 remaining, so I can do 2 more blocks. So I have, these are mirrored, so I'm going to square them both up the same way, but I want to make sure that I'm pairing my mirrored pairs. So this one I'm going to square up the way you would normally square up a flying goose block. This is going to square up to 4.5 inches by 2.5 inches. So when I place this down, half of 4.5 is 2.25. So I want my 2.25 line to be right at the tip of my flying goose, and I want the 1/4 inch line to be there as well, so that I have a 1/4 inch off the top of my flying goose for my quilt block, at least a 1/4 inch. I also want to make sure that I have 2.5 inches here. So the way that we've done this is actually going to be like another 1/16 down from a 1/4 inch if you cut the bottom at 2.5 inches, and you should have 4.5 inches. So everything is good. Oh, the other thing you want to make sure of is at 2.5 inches is that the edge of your triangle comes right in at 2.5 inches. Okay. Once we get that all arranged, then it's just a matter of cutting it down to 2.5 by 4.5. I don't really have anything over here to trim off, but there we go. All right, so that's my first block. I'm going to do the same thing with the second block. So I'm looking at 2.25. I want to get that right at the tip initially. Then I want to make sure that my edges come off at 2.5 and 2.5. And then square it up. If you forget to flip your seam allowance, it's fine to do it after you do this part, but know that it will change the size of your block a little bit just because of the nature of the fold taking up some of your fabric space. So it's better to do it before you square up, but if you forget, you can do it after you square up. All right, so that's those 2. But remember yesterday, or in the first part, I was showing you how I use tape to make templates, cutting templates. Well, I did that for my flying geese as well. And this is actually 2 templates. This one is for outside. So if my seam allowances were going to the inside, it would lock right down. If they were both going to the inside, it would lock right down, and I could cut my 1/4 inch. And because this is a 4.5 inch ruler, I could cut around 3 sides, then rotate it and get my 2.5 inches. This side is if my seam allowance was pressed to the outside, it would lock right in there. So I have 2 different ones on the same ruler that I can use to square up. For these blocks, because I have them with 1/2 out and 1/2 in, I can use either one of these taping arrangements. And so what I'm going to do is I'm using the inside one, and I'm just going to slide it up because it's riding along this seam allowance until I have 1/4 inch here, or I'm at my 2.5 here. This is what's going to match up the bottom part with another block, so that is the most important to me. So I also want to make sure that I'm getting a full a full seam allowance on either side if I can. So I'm just going to slide it up and down until it's where I want it, and then square it up. That's just if you want to make a cutting jig for your fabric. You don't have to do it this way, of course. On this one, I'm just lining up with 2.5 now to get the correct height. And there's that one cut. This one is how I actually did most of my flying geese. I don't know why I can't get flying geese out. How I got most of my flying geese squared up is I used my jig to square up the first part, which is the tip. And then this ruler I have taped off at 2.5 inches, so I just rotated it upside down. I use one of my hash marks on the right and the tape that's on the 2.5 inch mark to make sure that I'm square, and then I cut this at 2.5. I also use this to cut my 2.5 inch strips for the centerpiece. All right, so all of my pieces are squared up. I have a right piece and a left piece, and because of the way the seam allowances are pressed, this one towards the background, this one towards the pink, they will nest. So I want to pair these up, nest them, and sew them. The reason I have the right hand side one going towards the background is so that this seam allowance will be pressed down into the nesting of the other seam allowance. No pins required. Just line it up. You can feel when it's nested, and then you're ready to sew. All right, so we're nested here, and I'm just going to sew from the top to the bottom. To press the seam allowance open. So look at how nicely that is put together there with my 1/4 inch seam allowance there. I'm going to open the seam to get a little of the bulk out. See that I press the steam button even though I have no water in my iron. It's just habit. Okay. All right, so here are my 2 heart tops. I've got 2 center rectangles, and those are going to get sewn on next. I'm just going to flip this on top so I can control the direction of my seam allowances. Center it up. Let's go sew these together. almost done with these two hearts. For the dark hearts, I want to press towards the rectangle. When I make my lighter hearts, I'm going to press this away from the rectangle. So towards the rectangle on darker hearts, away from the rectangle on your lighter hearts. All right, the last step is we're going to sew the bottom onto our hearts. I'm just going to put the pointed part on top of the rectangle part, and we'll take these to the machine and get them finished up. And the second side is also going to be pressed towards the rectangle for the darker hearts and away from the rectangle for the lighter hearts. The reason we're doing this is that these are going to nest across the columns when we piece the final quilt together, and it will really help you to keep things aligned. So right, and that's how you do the heart part of the Hugs and Kisses quilt. I'll see you in the next video to do the kisses, which are the X's. So, see you later. So that was it for the hearts part of the Hugs and Kisses quilt. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you liked it enough to give me a like in the descriptions down below. Also, if you would subscribe, it would be greatly appreciated. And if you subscribe, please select the notification bell so that you know when I have a new video coming out. I don't do these on a regular schedule, and so that may be the only way you get to see it. And I love when you watch my videos. So thank you so much. You're the best. The next video, we're going to finish up with the X's and we're going to assemble the rest of the quilt. I hope you'll join me. See you soon.